Glad tidings, rapscallions. Today's episode 12 of It's Okay to Suck and Start Again. Our unedited, raw content. Call it what you may, call it what you like, but basically just a middle-aged man ranting on about some life experiences that you may be able to take and apply to your own life. Now, I've been trying to think about what I'm going to talk about today because the world is quite tumultuous. It's a lovely word, that, isn't it? But unfortunately, it explains something that's quite sort of uncertain and whatnot. And life is uncertain, isn't it? Life isn't sort of all certain and normal, and we just linear, and we set our dreams and we set our goals and we go off on our little rowing boats into the sea of life. And unfortunately, the thing is, nothing's perfect. Nothing will ever be perfect. And sometimes we've just got to deal with that. Now, over this last 2 weeks, maybe 3, I've been working really, sort of basically cutting down my actual doom scrolling content. And as to prove a point, in the last week, I've actually read a full book, and I started a second one, and I'm already just a bit so I set a goal at the beginning of June to read a book, 4 books before I go back to uni in October. And I've basically read 1.5 books already, and I've just started another one, and I'm about almost a third of the way into that one as well. So I guess you could say I'm well on my way to reading 4 books. But it goes to prove that how much time we spend and waste just obviously I want you to watch my content, but if you decide to turn off right now and go, actually, I'll go and read a book because Mucky Mitt said I should go and read a book instead of watching his video, well, I'd be cock a hoop, because I'm kind of doing my job then. Now, I like a lot of psychology-based self-help books. It's been one of those things that I think once I finish this one, I'm reading The Chimp Paradox at the moment, which I read way back in 2017, and I would say that book was life-changing, and that's why I'm reading it again, because sometimes it's almost 10 years since I read it, and as a result, it's probably why I decided to do a degree in psychology, because it gave me sort of like a really good breakdown of how we as humans have this multiple brain situation going on, where we have an emotional brain, which is obviously the chimp, which is our sort of more is basically our earliest form of our brain, because obviously depending what sort of way you look at things, from an evolutionary standpoint, if we did evolve from chimpanzees, which are our closest sort of cousins according to science, if you are religious and this offends you, then well, it is what it is. We've all got opinions and we've all got ways of looking at things in life. So and I don't mean to offend, but everybody's got a different standpoint. Personally, I'm not a religious person, but I do believe, you can be a good person and you can actually be a good human being without, believing in heaven and hell. And I do believe that actually, if you can do nice things for people without the reward or punishment of going to heaven or going to hell, then kind of makes you almost probably a better person, actually. Anyway, that's just my opinion. So basically, your chimp brain is pretty much our earliest, and then as we've evolved more, and the chimp itself, I will refer to it as the chimp because it's our chimpish brain. It only sees in black and white. It thinks with its feelings, and all the time will be like, oh, I don't feel like doing that. That's generally a chimp hijacking you. So, that's what Steve Peters gets to, Professor Steve Peters in the book. And then you've also got the human side of your brain, which uses logic, and well, hopefully uses logic and uses experience and reasoning, and somewhere along the lines. Now, the sad fact of the matter is the chimp is actually 5 times stronger than the human, as such is in real life. So that's when we may sort of spend a lot of time wrestling within our brains. Now, when I first ever read that, that was like, I understand why I am so, my chimp. And, we sort of go back in time, we go back to the, early of me, when I was kind of sort of doing self-development, starting to try and get on my feet again. And I was very impulsive and I was making quick decisions. And that was basically based, and I looked at it when I go, well, I just had this sort of crazy chimp inside my head that was like, I was letting it win all the time. Now, sometimes, the chimp is right, and there is misjustice, but it's how we react. Like, and one of the things that I can't remember where I sort of saw this, but like, one of the things that sort of has also helped me, it's not what happens to you, it's how you react and how you deal with that thing. And sometimes we get into arguments, sometimes we get into these things with these moral situations where we end up arguing with one another, and sometimes we say very hurtful things to one another. And unfortunately, that is also, one-upmanship in arguments can be detrimental to friendships, family relationships, or even, romantic relationships. So I've said some very hurtful things in the past. I take a lot of accountability. And going back to The Power of Habit, which I read just over the last week, you start crossing over these different books. And one of the reasons I sort of stopped reading as many of these books is because I was like, well, it's kind of repeating itself. But sometimes you've got to reaffirm those lessons that you're learning from these books and things like that. So I read The Power of Habit probably back 6 years ago. Now I'm rereading, The Chimp Paradox. And these books are sort of like, it's also sort of really good because I'm sort of going back 10 years to what I was like 10 years ago and what I am now. And one of the things that I champion a lot, and I was never really good at, was the power of consistency. And I used to champion consistency, but I wasn't very consistent myself. Do you know what I mean? I was jumping from one thing to the next thing to the next thing, and obviously this bleeds into my sort of current situation where I'm wanting to look at moving to Australia. And I've had, and then we sort of review this and we go, well, actually, I've been thinking maybe it's not me, maybe I'm worrying, what if this happens? And the what ifisms has begun to take over, and I'm like, in my reasonable human brain, I'm like, actually, it's what I want, it's what I've always wanted. But obviously the uncertainty, and another thing that I sort of think back to is like, I kind of feel, because like if I was going back to Melbourne, which is where I've lived twice before, I know Melbourne, I know it like the back of my hand, but I know it better than I would do, say, Adelaide or the Gold Coast or wherever I could move to in the future. So obviously, once upon a time, I would just move places without ever being there. First time I ever went to Melbourne, I'd never been there before. But obviously after a few months, you sort of get used to it, you get used to the transport. And then I probably got to know Melbourne better the second time I went, because I actually didn't just stay in one place. I lived in 4 different places when I lived in Melbourne. So I was moving like pretty much every 3 months, on average, while I lived out there. So obviously that was massively quite unsettling. And going back to the sort of power of consistency, it's like every time you move, it costs money to move. Every time you've got to settle a little bit. And I feel that's why for about from 2000 probably 12 to 2022, even though I lived in Belfast for 3 years, there was still that air of uncertainty while I was living in Belfast, because obviously we had the pandemic, that the global P word that we had to deal with, and that was again a tumultuous time. I'm using that word, I'm proper using it today. But again, I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know when I was going back to work, and it actually led me to leave the hairdressing and barbering industry, because I was like, well, my job isn't deemed important. So if this was to happen again, what happens? Do you know what I mean? I can't get wiped out again. I can't. So all these things, all this sort of like, all these life lessons from the last 10 years and like 14 years maybe, of moving around, the uncertainty, picking myself up, watching how decimated my finances, and this time now I've been in the same place 4 years, I've worked in the same job for 3 years, I did come back to barbering, I'm doing well, I've been consistent, I'm pretty much putting round about the same amount of money through the till. Once I get the youth work out of the way, once I'm not doing the youth club on a Tuesday night, I'm going to come back to doing more days in barbering because I have to make more money. So all these things, all these life experiences and reading these books, and I do believe reading the books is, and keeping me away from doom scrolling as much and listening to sort of like lots of you know, doom and gloom and right versus left and all this division and all what's going on in Iran and what's going on in Belfast and what's going on in Southampton and what's going on in Russia and Ukraine. It's just it might sound a bit harsh to say this, but it doesn't really impact me immediately. It will impact me, like with certain things, if the Strait of Hormuz isn't sorted, but overall, and this is one of the things why I don't watch the news, but now I feel like it's bleeding into my social media. And when it's bleeding into your social media, it's like, well, I don't watch the news for this exact same reason. I don't watch the news because I don't want to be affected by things that really aren't immediately going to happen to me. And I think this is, going back to the chimp paradox, a lot of people will turn the news on first thing in the morning, or they'll, the algorithm will work against them. And by the end of the day, by the lunchtime, they're all in a tiz, they're all in it. And it takes you away from focusing on what is present and real in your life. And that's one of the things that, it's okay to suck and start again is all about, because it's getting into the good habits. It's getting into, sort of, I feel, we can all have a better life if we just basically look at what we're doing and just changing things up a little bit. Like I say, instead of like reaching for my phone all the time, I'm reaching for a book. I'm aiming to read a minimum of 50 pages a day, which is quite a lot of pages. But if you think about like how much time I spent on social media, doom scrolling and, just watching reels, say I did like 40 minutes a day, I can probably there or thereabouts read 50 pages in just a little bit over that. And I'm finding myself like trying to steal moments now to read books. And books, maybe not everybody likes to read, but I know, but I sometimes think to myself, well, people who moan about the life, if a book can help you better your life, then would it not be better to sit down and read for like 10 minutes a day, 15 minutes a day, and just build up better habits by doing that? And that's just one of those things really where you go, well, unfortunately we just don't seem to have this. It's like the blame game that I've gone back to a few times. You know what I mean? People talking about, oh well, it's such and such's fault coming over here, taking all the jobs, taking all the houses. Are you homeless? Are you working? Because if you're getting offended about, people coming here and taking your job, then, and you're not working, then maybe there's some accountability there that you need to look at. Because if somebody can just turn up and not speak English and go get a job, it's pretty much on you, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? And I'm not saying this to be brutal or horrible, but I do feel like a lot of these people who are sort of getting, and I do it myself, I get offended on other people's behalves because, my sort of, even though I am more central than I've ever been, it's still old habits die hard. But I am probably just off centre left now, whereas once upon a time I was very much, swinging off the left pole. Not quite, communist left, but, believing that, and now I've come to realise that taxing the rich is almost impossible. Because what you've got to do is understand, rather than try and tax the rich and take all their money, because you're not going to be able to do it, because they've got so many loopholes, it's learning those loopholes. And that's one of the things in the last 5 years since I gave up alcohol, since I gave up smoking and a smoke and a pancake. I've had more money, so then I've been able to invest more money. But for years before that, I was like, well, it's all the richest full-time poor. It's all they're taking all our money, blah, 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 blah. But in reality, it was me. It was my habits. Now you potentially, you could be, I've gone and bought a load of stuff today because I'm trying to eat healthier. So I've gone and bought things like almond flour and coconut oil and things like that so that I can make substitutes to the sweeties that I like to eat on an evening, because it's just changing the habit, the routine, going back to the routine of habit, the power of habit, going back to that where, you can't change the routine and the cue and the reward, but you change the reward at the end of it. So at the end of at the end of an evening meal, I'm trying to go out for a walk for 40 minutes. And then after I do that, I've got like some form of healthier version of a brownie or something like that, yeah, it's not sugar, is it? But at the end of the day, it's better for me. And after a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks of doing that, I'll wean myself off this, sugary, high that I like to have on an evening, and then I'll feel the better benefits of my health and things like that. But it all takes time, and not everybody is me, and I'm not everybody else, and I can't speak for you, and you can't speak for me. But at the end of the day, it's sometimes just looking at the things that we do and our self-control and working out how we can better ourselves through that self-control, building better habits. Rome wasn't built in a day is a very, very good, it's a good example. But at the end of the day, it was built brick by brick. Do you know what I mean? And if you can put down 1 brick today and then 1 brick tomorrow, and then maybe build up to 2 bricks next week and 4 bricks the week after, and keep working, once you gain that self-confidence and you start seeing, you pull the thread of change within yourself and you start seeing the benefits of that change, you start feeling more rewarded and you start feeling happier. Like one of the things I'm feeling at the moment is a t-shirt that didn't fit me. It was really tight on me about 4 weeks ago, is now basically hanging off me. I haven't lost weight because I've put on muscle, but I've worked hard and I've sweated it out in the gym, and I've really cut down a lot of these things that I need to look at. But like I say, I only use myself as an example because I am a real person, as you can see. And, that real person, as, I say this, I used to say this when I used to teach barbering and hairdressing, I've made a million mistakes so you don't have to. But sometimes you have to make those mistakes. Your journey is your journey. That is one thing that I've come to realise, especially in youth work. And one of the things that I'm sort of trying to work on is compartmentalizing things, because at the end of the day, I carry, the feelings of other people and the burden of emotions and stuff like that. And it upsets me when people are upset, and it upsets me when people aren't doing well, and it upsets me when there's unfairness and injustice in the world. But unfortunately, that's the world we live in, and that, you've got to build a thicker skin, haven't you? Anyway, I'm trying to keep these under 20 minutes, and I hope what I say there, and I have ranted on and rambled on a little bit, but I hope something makes sense to you. Like I say, just work on 1 brick a day, laying 1 brick, or even laying the foundations. If it's whether you need to whether you need to build, give something up, you're struggling with addiction or whatever, then make that phone call, or at least admit to yourself that you do need help. Because once you admit that first step, I knew I had a problem years ago, and the first step was admitting to myself and my friends that I needed help. And you'd be surprised how much help there is out there. On that note, I'm always with you. Take it easy. Toodle pip, goodbye, see you later.